The Thin Prison. Hold this pen close to your ear. Listen, can you hear them? Pictures burning as a flame, drawings glittering like a tear. Locked, all locked in this slim pen. They are crying for freedom, and you can release them. Set them running from prison. Himalayas, balloons, Captain Hook, red bricks, London town, sequins, cricket bags, large brown boots, lions and lemonade. Look, I just let them out. Pick up your pen and start. Think of all the things that you know. Then let lines and shapes dance from your pen. Well, People's Church, I am Chris Measzros. I am not only today your Sunday service coordinator, I'm also the person who's going to be doing the presentation today. And I want to welcome everybody. For those of you who have never been to one of our services before, this is going to be an unusual service. For those of you who have, it may seem like an even more unusual service. Generally, we save the last service before the official summer services begin. We save that for a flower service, and it's a chance for us to come together. And the invitation is to bring a flower, you put it in a bouquet during one part of the flower ritual, and then later on you take another person's flower. Or sometimes we've done it where a person in front of you picks a flower for you. But there's always kind of the gathering and the distribution of flowers. Then you go away with a flower and it gives you a lot to think about. Well, of course, now for the second year in a row, we can't get together in person and exchange those flowers. So what I'm proposing today is an artistic venture. Today, I'm going to invite all of you to draw a bouquet of flowers. And at the end of the service, I'm going to invite you to present this bouquet on kind of a little virtual gallery. Now, some of you I know are not going to do this. Drawing is just not in your nature. Long ago, you've said to yourself, I'm not one of those people. And what I'm asking you today to do is to rethink that and say, well, maybe I could be. And I'd love you to pick up a pen and try. If you have some paper around, even plain old copy paper like this, an old bill, maybe a really large envelope sent you from some organization that has a large bit of space in the back. Those make some of the best canvases. And I invite you to draw. I'll show you how to draw maybe 3 or 4 flowers during the Time for All Ages. And then a little bit later on, I'm going to be speaking about how kind of unplugging from the internet and from online life and replacing that with art is not only a good thing and a valuable thing for your soul, but it could actually be something that could help our whole, our democracy, and could help our whole nation and world. I'll be speaking about those things during the sermon, and then directly after the sermon, I'll be inviting you to actually show us your artwork. I suggest that you do your first artwork in a pencil, and then I would suggest you go back later with a marker or a pen or something. I teach in Bangor Public Schools. I teach kindergarten through fourth grade, and sometimes I'm an art teacher, and sometimes I'm a music teacher. And during the last year, I had 2 months when I was a virtual art teacher. And I can tell you from experience, when you hold up a picture in front of the camera and it's just done with pencil lines, it doesn't read the same as it does when you have nice outlines. So that is the one request that I do have. In addition to, I request that you participate. And so with that, let's go ahead and let's have the introit.
This day we come once more together as winds of earth call forth our names. My people offer up the strength of this circle. May we come rejoicing, determined, united in love of life again. This day we come once more together as winds of earth call forth our names. My people offer up the strength of this circle. May we come rejoicing, determined, united in love of life again.
Today, I'd like this chalice from my basement, a basement where during most of the school year, on my school's Wednesdays, which are our virtual days, I taught children. And then during the 2 months from Thanksgiving until about the middle of January, I taught down here every day. And what I invite you to do is wherever you are, if you have a chalice that you're lighting or a candle, we invite you to tell us your city, tell us your neighborhood, tell us your street, so that we can see where all the chalices are being lit on this wonderful Sunday morning. And our chalice lighting words today, and go ahead and just type it in the chat. Our words today come from Marjorie Montgomery. Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. And this might normally be a time for announcements. I think the only announcement I have is to say that next week we'll be starting our summer services. Our summer services are very distinct and different from our school year services, if you will, because they're a lot more interactive. The sermons are a little bit shorter, and there's some time for some questions and some answerings, and those will also be virtual. And so you'll find a link just like you did today, and we invite you to come and share those. All right, and now I'm just going to go ahead and switch up where my camera is. And if you have your piece of paper, I've already started one. I was practicing this morning on my whiteboard. If you already have, if you have a piece of paper, go ahead and put it in front of you on a nice hard surface. Like I say, I suggest you use a pencil. What I generally tell my students when we're drawing, because we're about to draw some flowers now, is I suggest that you put your pencil down so lightly that it just leaves a mark. Because if you push down your pencil, it creates a little indentation in your paper, and then it's harder to erase later if you have a way to erase it. Now, of course, flowers can be anything. And if you would like to do flowers that are imaginary flowers, you can go ahead and do that. So Here's some flowers that I did on a recent airplane ride when I was visiting my daughter in Arizona. And you'll see these are quite different. These are completely just ornamental. They're just playing with shapes and they're just purely fun. And if those are the flowers you'd like to do, then ignore all of my instructions and spend this time doing that. I'll be showing you how to draw some different flowers that you might have in your garden. First one I want to show you is that one that you just saw me erase, and that's a marigold. So we're going to be looking at a marigold. Marigold, the flower tops are generally brown. So we're going to be looking at them from the side. So we need to think this oval shape. Oh, I think I'll do this. I think I'll turn off these lights. There we go. I think it's a little bit better. And then in the middle of that, go ahead and put just a little shape, a little forearm shape that his arms come. Then around that, create a squiggle, kind of a flattened down squiggle. So it's kind of longer as you get towards the sides, and it's shorter when you get towards the top. And then keep creating some squiggles. You can actually color this in with the colors that marigolds actually are. If you don't have that, you can choose an imaginary color and make it something that marigolds aren't. It's your picture. It's your expression. It's your stamp on the world. My marker is a lot thicker than your pencils, so you will probably still be able to create squiggles long after I run out of space to create squiggles. And it's kind of wonderful. It's kind of wonderful that you can create this picture that reads like a marigold just with some kind of organic shapes. And then what I would do is go to the middle of that shape and kind of come down, pretend that the stem starts there, and then come down where at the bottom of the flower and make one part of the flower stem. And go ahead and make the other part of the flower stem. One of the reasons I picked the marigold is not only I think it's a beautiful flower, I love the leaves. The leaves are kind of leaves. They're like an oak leaf that goes on vacation. Just kind of long and skinny, kind of have that oak-like shape. Another one on the side. You don't have to be perfect. You know, one of the things I think is incredible is that leaf shape, the leaf shape that you're making as an organic shape is probably the only one of its kind. Probably in history, nobody's made a leaf quite like the leaf that you just made, and nobody will ever make a leaf like that again, not exactly like it. And it's mind-blowing as somebody who's creating art, that it's an original creation. Next, I'm going to go with the tulip. I always think about tulips, and it makes me think of my mother, because it was always one of the first flowers that came up, and because it was a bulb, it meant that it could keep coming up on its own. And when my mother got really busy, it was always one of the things that I could count on being in the garden. So let's create a couple of tulips. Let's create one that's kind of looking off to this side. So it's kind of an egg shape, only the top is kind of pointed. That's kind of how the top of a tulip goes, or like the petal of a tulip. And then I imagine the other part of the leaf, or the other part of the petal, is underneath there somewhere. But I'm going to come out. Disappears under there. One, like at the top. And then there are a whole bunch of leaves. This is always one of the most exciting parts of seeing flowers, is when the flowers are all closed up. You know that they're just going to they're just going to burst forth, and you don't know what they're going to be, but it's like you're looking at the potential of something. Let's move up, petal, down, down like that. Pointed leaves. That leaf is disappearing behind our marigold. You'll notice I'm leaving this part blank because that'll create space for you to make your vase. Or maybe you want to make this to be a garden. You want to put it in the ground. Well, let's make another tulip pointing up. Pointed. So like I say, it's like an egg shape, except the top is a little bit more pointed. And then we're going to imagine that other part of the petal to the left of this first petal, we're going to imagine that it is underneath there. We're going to come down like that. Imagine that petal starting there underneath it, like that. And then we're going to make the outlines of the tops of all those petals as they're closed. Make a stem that comes down. You know, and depending on how you want your vase to be, you might want a vase that's tall and thin. You know, the Greeks and the Romans believed that things that were tall and straight showed strength. They believed that things that were kind of long and flat showed peace and calm, and things that were angled on the side showed instability and action, perhaps a little bit of chaos. All right, the third flower we're going to do is probably one of my favorites. It's the daffodil. And this daffodil is going to be looking straight at us. So we're going to make the horn of the daffodil. Some of the books I was looking at to get this drawing, they said that daffodils are sometimes called the trumpets of spring. I think that's a lovely thought. And we're mixing flower petals around center. I think it's so interesting that flower petals, in terms of the numbers, they're either in numbers you can divide by 2, or they're in numbers you can divide by 5. I just thought that was interesting. So 5 petals on it. Oh, because it's hiding behind the marigold, we get to miss out on one of my favorite parts of this flower petal in terms of drawing, which is I love that the daffodil has almost the stem almost looks like it's like a straw that you forgot to take the paper off of. It's fairly full. We can put some more flowers over there. We can put some over there. But I kind of like this arrangement of flowers. So then I think what I'm going to probably do is to come down here, vase, and I think the bottom of the vase. I'll just continue to make it a traditional vase. Well, you know what? Maybe I'll put a handle on it, like the vase that I have flowers in next to me. So it's really kind of a picture, kind of a picture shape. You could draw, you could put some drawings on there. You could write a phrase that would be important to you. Maybe there's something you'd really like to inspire yourself to do later this summer. Maybe there's a way that you'd like to be this summer. There's a way you'd like to act, and you'd like to interact with the world. That could be something you write on the side. And then after it's all colored in, this could be something that you put up somewhere that you look at a lot, and it reminds you of this day, and it reminds you of these drawings and the way that art can connect people. So anyway, what I invite you to do with the rest of the service is I would like you to take the rest of the service, and I would like you to keep working on this. So I invite you to color this in. I invite you, as I said before, to outline it so that it has some kind of some thick lines on the outlines of it, because I'll be inviting you to share it in the front of the screen. You don't have to share it in front of the screen at the end, but the more people who do, the more we'll kind of get a sense of we'll get a sense of each other. One of the things I know, and one of the things that I think is so beautiful about art is I can look at a student's art and I can say, my gosh, that reminds me exactly of their personality. And I think the same thing is true with adults. So I'd love to see your artwork later. So now we're going to be having a special offering by an organization called uh, El Concilio. And there's a short video that will tell us about some of the work that El Concilio will do.
Hola amigos, familia, y miembros of People's Church. My name is Adrian Vasquez. I'm the Executive Director of El Concilio in Kalamazoo. I want to start by giving thanks for the opportunity to share a little more about El Concilio. Last time I spoke in front of you was in person, and I shared with you some of the difficult times that El Concilio was having around that time. I can report that El Concilio was able to overcome many of those challenges. El Concilio did not close its doors. El Concilio was able to grow, to expand its services and programs to the Latinx community in Kalamazoo. El Concilio was also able to create more collaborations to ensure that more services and programs were available to Latinx families, especially the undocumented families. As the only Latinx bicultural bilingual organization, we continue to focus a lot of our programs and services to them. And all their participation is always very important. We don't create or we don't have programs that are not important and that are not valued by our families and individuals. I think that has making us to be a different organization. And I give thanks to many organizations like People's Church that was able to respond to the needs, to the support that El Concilio needed in very difficult times. Thank you. Many individuals responded by volunteering, donating, and speaking out for us. Thank you. Last year was a very difficult year. I know many were impacted, if not all were impacted. Many members of our families, many members from our community lost their life to COVID. Many lost their jobs. Many lost wages. But I can say to you that Concilio was in a good position to respond to these emergency needs. We created a Mi Gente Fund, a fund that was available for undocumented families and individuals that were forgotten by our state and federal governments. We thought it was injustice. We thought it was not fair. So we responded. We were able to raise funds to provide, to keep people in their homes so they could to pay their bills, to buy medicine. My staff, my board members, and many other volunteers responded so we were able to be creative and to continue some of our programs for our youth and families. Testing was also an issue, but we will also be able to respond. We were able to collaborate with many other organizations to ensure that testing was available for our families. Now, I think we're getting out of this. Now we're working with the vaccine. We're making sure that our families have all the information that they need to ensure that they get the vaccine. I'm sure there's still some questions not answered, but we're continuing to collaborate with many other organizations that many of their vaccines are available to our families. We're coming back. I think we're getting out of this. And I think we were getting out of this because we're all together. El Concilio is here not just because of my work, my staff, but it's because we all work together to ensure that there was an organization that will continue to serve the Latinx families and individuals. A lot of our work is focused on families and youth. We continue to expand some of the services now to our Latinx businesses because they also were forgotten in this situation, in this pandemic. But I think what I learned from this situation that I hope we don't live through this again, that we will all working together, that we will all are in this together and we're going to get out of it. So I want to give thanks to all of you for the continued support to our work, to our families, to the individuals that most of the times, are forgotten. But I can say to you that thanks to many of you, thanks to for all your all organizations that spoke and reach out to us, we're here. So thank you for the opportunity.
Color and fragrance, magical rhythm, sweet changing music will change us with them. Life within life, in a light gently glowing. Surely you seem to be God's vision growing. Oh, starry heavens, worlds of all splendor, suns without number, new life engender, wheel in a wheel with the light brightly glowing, moving in harmony, God's vision growing, handful of pebbles, high mountain passes, depths of the ocean, dew on the grasses, great things and small, with the light gently glowing, word of the wordless song, God's vision growing, delicate beings, lace wing and sparrow, in a field and forest, clover and yarrow, life greeting life with the light brightly glowing. None are too small to be God's vision growing. In human eyes burns the soul of living, illumines altars of loving giving, greeting we meet, seeing light brightly glowing, sharing the greater life, God's vision growing, shaper of all things, to us you've given our chance to keep here on earth the heaven, moving in harmony, light gently glowing. May we be gratefully God's vision growing.
Please join me in reading the message of giving thanks for all that sustains us. From the countless gifts we each have been given, gifts of life and love and sustenance, we share in these, we bring these small portions to share in the works of love which none of us can accomplish alone. Now is the time in our service when we can share with the rest of the community the joys and sorrows that have happened in this last week. We would ask you to please keep the joys and sorrows to things that foiled. An American psychologist and one of the first researchers to study creativity. Guilfoyle's original alternative uses test gave subjects 2 minutes to come up with as many uses as they could think of for everyday objects such as cups, paper clips, or a chair. In Mann's version, she preceded the creativity test with 20 minutes of a meaningless task, in this case, copying numbers out of a phone book. Afterward, her subjects were asked to come up with as many uses as they could for 2 paper cups, the kind you get in an ecologically unscrupulous water cooler. The participants devised mildly original ideas from their cups, such as planter pots and sandbox toys. In the next experiment, Mann ratcheted up the boring quotient. Instead of just copying numbers out of the phone book for 20 minutes, this time they had to read the phone numbers out loud. Although a handful of people actually enjoyed this task, go figure, Then they were excused from the study. The vast majority of the participants found reading the phone book absolutely stupefyingly boring. It's more difficult to space out when engaged in an activity such as writing than when one does something as passive as reading. The result, as Mann had hypothesized, was even more creative ideas for the paper cups, including earrings, telephones, all kinds of musical instruments, and Mann's favorite, a Madonna-style bra. This group thought beyond the cup as container. By means of this experiment, Mann proved her point. People who are bored think more creatively than those who aren't.
Earth was given as a garden cradle for humanity, tree of life and tree of knowledge, place for our discovery. Here was home for all your creatures, born of land and sky and sea, all created in your image, all to live in harmony. Show to us again the garden where all life flows fresh and free. Gently guide your sons and daughters into full maturity. Teach us how to trust each other, how to use for good our power, how to touch the earth with reverence. Then once more we'll eat in flower. Bless the earth and all your children. One creation, make us whole. Interwoven, all connected, planet-wide and inmost soul. Holy Mother, life bestowing, bid our waste and warfare cease. Fill us all with grace o'erflowing. Teach us how to live in peace.
All right. Actually, before I begin the sermon, I would like to acknowledge Reed, and I would like to acknowledge Savannah and Jennifer Drake and the People Singers and Daryl, and I'd like to acknowledge all the people who have taken their time and have had to work in a very, very difficult environment called technology. I sometimes feel technology is just kind of held together with strings and wires, kind of paper clips and things for as easy as it is to break. And yet with the most grace and the most effort and the most commitment, these people at People's Church come every week and they put together a service that is smooth and is coherent, is surprising, and has hopefully been very inspiring. So I would just love to, from the bottom of my heart and from all of us at the Sunday Service Committee, I'd like to acknowledge all of those people. And now, on to a sermon I could very well have entitled Jenny Odell and the Third Space. I'd like to try to bring together these kind of disparate elements that I have been talking about and hopefully cohere them. Jenny Odell, in her book, How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy, urges us to re-examine our relationship with being online and technology. She offers us a perspective that the most precious thing that we have is our attention. She says, quote, not only does it seem like we're all working more, but even when we're not working, we're expected to produce. We produce something that represents our vacation on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. We're constantly checking back on things like Twitter. She argues that in the current media environment, that environment asks us to have something to show for our time always, and that the simple decision not to do those things appears radical. Quote, doing nothing really means doing something else that's closer to maybe observation or curiosity and doesn't necessarily have results that you can point to at the end of it. Odell herself doesn't go into the process of unplugging, but if you would like to have a process and you like to have kind of a cookbook in how to unplug, that would be found in this great book, Bored and Brilliant, that I quoted earlier by Marouche Zamarodi, who kind of gives you a step-by-step process for examining what you do online and then beginning to dismantle those things that take our attention. And take our attention it does. Those dings and those little sound effects that our phones have and that our other devices have, it's like a tap, tap, tap of the shoulder. And we as human beings have to look around when we're tapped in the shoulder. Odell compares understanding to ecological awareness. She says, for example, if you're online and you see a headline that pops up, or a headline pops up on the side of something, an opinion is embedded inside that headline. And the opinion asks you to choose a side. Often the headline is designed to generate a strong emotional response. It is a sad fact that now most Americans get their news from Facebook. So even if you don't click, that headline manipulates you. Websites are watching you and they know not just what we're clicking on, but they also know how long your eyes are lingering on a particular area where text is. And those images start to become the walls of our world. I believe that the world that the online world creates is a very simplified world. It's a righteous world. It's a world that seeks to dominate another tribe. It compresses and it turns things into this very binary choice. Things in these headlines are either good or bad. They're a threat or they're an ally. There are people who get laughed at, and then there are the people who are the object of laughter, and the people who laugh. There's a quality of an echo chamber that we're trapped in. Because, of course, algorithms, as many of you may know, are working to figure out what our online habits are so that they can keep our attention. Because the more attention we give to a particular website, the more we click through stories, the more advertisers can get money from us and the more money they make. So it's a financial system that's really built on our attention, and it's built on influencing us in ways that are conscious and in ways that are unconscious. I love, for example, how at the end of her YouTube segments, comedian Samantha Bee always says, please click below to subscribe or let YouTube autoplay if you'd like to be radicalized. The joke, of course, is that none of us want to be radicalized. You know, we don't wake up in the morning and say to ourselves, you know, I wish there was some really large power, like some really powerful computer that could examine what I'm doing, reveal all of my conscious and unconscious biases and prejudices, prey on those so that I'll spend more time online and my perspectives will get viewed and I'll perceive anything outside my views as a crazy threat. Jenny Odell, by contrast, leans heavily on metaphors of ecology, particularly local ecology. This viewpoint provides a feeling of being grounded that is different from the placelessness of the online experience. You know, we all have seen people walking down the street or walking sometimes in national parks, looking down at their phone. My daughters, in fact, have a little private joke between them. Whenever we're in a public space and they see a child in a stroller who has an iPad in front of them, they look at each other and they say, rocks and stones, rocks and stones. And it's their joke that when they have children, they're not going to give their children technology. The only toys their children will play with are rocks and leaves and stones and things like that. So it's a feeling, she believes that when you engage in local ecology, you have a feeling of being grounded that's a very different place from the placelessness of the online experience. And this is because that while there are places and things and identities in nature, they are so intricately bound up with each other other beings and systems, they're so intricately woven that it becomes hard to draw a line about any one thing. Odell herself lives in the San Francisco Bay Area and began her unplugging experience and her exploration in doing nothing in curiosity with birds. And she became fascinated with bird sounds and being able to identify birds. That led her into kind of being able to identify trees where those birds would like to habitate. So she began to map where the trees were and what the trees were that certain birds were attracted to. Then she began to study migration patterns, and she realized that something that's kind of obvious, except I didn't think of it either, which is that weather and migration come from somewhere. You know, she found out that there were these things that people who study weather call atmospheric rivers. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's that the fact that the weather picks up rain from one area in the form of clouds taken from water, and you can actually see the weather coming across the landscape, and it drops it off in someplace else in the form of rain. And so she herself got very excited. She's half Filipino. When she found out that there was a rainstorm that was going to be coming to the Bay Area that had water that was from the Philippines. And she went out that day and she collected the water and she puts it on her desk. And every day it reminds her of how weather comes from someplace. And the birds come from someplace and they're going to someplace. And it reminds her how everything is interrelated. In addition to this ecological perspective, Jenny Odell has curated a humility. She believes that humility is something that is really a powerful power within us, and it's a power that we can grow. We can actually learn to become more humble, become more empathetic. So she has really curated an empathy in herself. Quote, humility is an acknowledgement. There's always more to learn, that you will be surprised that someone can tell you something that you don't know and that you might change your mind about something. She contrasts this with having a personal online brand on Twitter, where you're not allowed to change your mind and you are expected to have this very monolithic, stable personality. About this, Odell says, quote, spending time thinking about any context is really helpful for having a more complex and nuanced conversation. Even the thought process about something that might seem cut and dry without looking at it more closely. In other words, being online makes us more positional, and it creates more self-righteousness, and we become more self-righteous consumers of news and of data and of information, and we miss a chance to see the ecological or the context of a particular issue. Or, as a storyteller, how I frame it is by viewing ourselves as the protagonist in all of our dramas, we are blinded to the ways in which we are the villain sometimes, or at least a complicating character. Odell argues that by acknowledging that issues in the world are more like local ecology, you begin to be able to see them in terms of their complicated and interrelated parts. And this allows you to occupy what she calls the third space. Quote, if you ask someone a question, you are already framing possible answers, especially, I think, if someone is asked in an aggressive way. It can bring up this fight or flight response in someone. They're already thinking, okay, what's my answer? Instead of a larger question like, do I need to answer this question at all? Or could I instead answer a different question? That is the third space. The third space is that larger perspective that says, you know what, rather than answering this question, what's a larger question I could answer? This third space then is the ability to think in a non-linear, non-binary way. The third space, I believe, is where Yoko Ono and John Lennon were when they got into bed and they talked about peace. It's where, in the book, she talks about the women's soccer team being challenged by Trump online, didn't respond directly to what he said, but instead put out something that made his comments appear in a much larger context. They didn't stay silent and they didn't respond to Trump in his own terms. Instead, they responded to him in this third space that Trump didn't quite know how to occupy, and so he dropped it. Now, to bring this back to art and to bring it back to the artist's way, when you learn about art and when you learn about music and dance and you go to a piece of artwork or you go to a dance or you go to a gallery, it allows you to occupy this third space. Great art allows you to feel comfortable with ambiguity and with ambiguousness. Complex art really elicits mixed emotions and kind of multiple emotions. It creates empathy. I know that one of the reasons I asked Jennifer Drake today to uh, play the piece that she created is that a lot of modern music allows me to feel feelings that I didn't feel before. So that when I hear something like Debussy, or the first time that I really sat down and listened to John Coltrane, it was almost like a new emotion that I never knew I could feel before emerged in me. It was like being able to see a fourth primary color. There were new things that were available, and I was hooked. And you'll have to, and just to be straight, I'm very hooked on art, and I'm very hooked on achieving that third space in myself. You know, at the Detroit Institute of Art, there was once a 20-minute video of a woman who was standing inside of a kitchen, a colonial kitchen. She was in a colonial outfit, and in her outstretched hand, she had a very large bowl of milk. Now, if any of you have ever tried to hold a really large bowl of something liquid with outstretched hands in front of you, you'll know that it's very hard to do. It's very hard to keep yourself still. And so, as my wife and I watched this video, we could see her straining. We could see the little ripples beginning to form on top of the milk. Then all of a sudden, we were having these conversations about women's place in history, on women's strength, on what a woman's life must have been like at that time when that outfit and that kitchen would have not seemed out of place. And we're having all these discussions, and they're occurring in a space that isn't intellectual, it's emotional. And we're getting an emotional and an empathetic feelings about it as well. And it's a space, it's a third space that could only have been created by a great piece of art. And so looking at art and going to galleries and going to theater events is marvelous, but I would argue creating art is even better. As somebody who's a visual artist and teaches visual art to children, I grapple with line, shape, proportion, design every time I pick up the pen. And my favorite is actually doing ceramics, and that creates even more problems and even more things to have to grapple with, because you have to think about physics and you have to think about the way that walls are built. You know, you want the walls of your pot or your vase to be thin enough that it's nice and light, but you also want it to be thick enough that it can support the weight of what you're creating. You know, once there was an experiment where a famous violinist was put inside of a CAT scan to measure her brain activity as she was playing the violin. The results were spectacular. There was tremendous brain activity in all these parts of the brain that people would never associate with music. The engineer who was running CAT scans and had runs CAT scans all of his life, remarked that there was only one other time he had ever seen more brain activity in a CAT scan, and that was when somebody had had a seizure inside the machine. This third space is not only valuable for us through political discourse, but it's also valuable for us personally. In the 90s, I will tell one on myself, I was a very righteous and indignant animal rights activist. I not only had fights about animal issues with my family and my friends, I had that in college lecture halls that were nothing to do with animals. I had it in the grocery store. I would seek out arguments. I'd overhear something and off I went. And I called it education. Now, there were two events that really changed me and pushed me into a third space around animal issues. One event was there was an anti-hunting protest in Lansing that drew counter-protesters. And at the beginning of the rally and the counter-protest, we were on one side of a corner and the pro-hunting group was on the other. But gradually, as we were shouting things back and forth, it became really hard to hear them through the traffic. So we gradually kind of merged our groups, which really confused people who were driving by and wanted to honk for or against something, to be like, oh, I don't know that I want to honk because the group I disagree with might think I'm honking in favor of them. Well, as we talked, nobody, I think, really changed any of our positions, but I think we came away with a respect that somebody else had the moxie to come out in the middle of a hot summer day with signs for 3 hours on behalf of something that they believed in. The second thing that really shifted my experience was I was involved in a cable access show that brought together a woman who was a veal farmer, a man who had been involved in animal testing, a hunter, and I came on as the animal activist to bring the animal rights perspective. Now, through the course of it and through the discussion, I began to realize I actually had more in common with the hunter than I did with the veal farmer or the person who did animal testing, because I realized the hunter really had a view of the beauty of nature and the sacredness of nature that the other two didn't have. The other two had a very mechanistic view of nature, or they had a very commodified view of nature. And I really came out of that experience seeing hunter as, the hunting response is not my response, but I get the validity of it. It really allowed me to humanize that person and see that person as an ally. And then later, I realized that groups like MUCC, Ducks Unlimited have really done a lot for the environment. And again, it's not my swing, but they're on my team. We're rowing generally the same direction, even if our boats aren't touching. In fact, the shift in me from animal rights extremist was to somebody who can tolerate and can really listen and validate people's positions was so great. I was once told by a coworker that I was the only vegan she'd ever met who had a sense of humor. So in closing, Odell herself writes that unplugging empowers her personal environmental activism. Quote, it's different. It's different. It's the difference between reading a million horrifyingly depressing articles about climate change and in Oakland getting familiar with shorebirds that come to Lake Merritt every winter. If those birds decline in some way that was observable, that feels different. I have a personal and contextual relationship with that loss. Odell herself says that, of course, she doesn't advocate doing nothing. She advocates you filling that space with something. But I would say to you, if somebody asks you today, hey, how was the sermon today for People's Church? And you said, I get nothing out of the service. I would not be insulted. Getting nothing would be a very good thing for you to get out of the service. But to close, so there's going to be there'll be a closing song. Oh no, so yeah, so there's gonna be a closing song, and then afterwards, what I invite you to do is to put your picture up in the screen, and then what Reed will do is he will click through, so you can put your screen in gallery mode and you can see it that way. But I think what's much more fun is to actually see the individual pictures. So Reed will go through and he'll click the individual pictures so you can see the art gallery that has been created here virtually by the People's Church community. Oh, I take that back. We're doing the artwork now. I forgot there was no final one. Ooh, thank you, Diane. Oh my goodness. And looks like somebody in back. Oh, thank you, Savannah. That's a beautiful, beautiful flower. Thank you, David. Marvelous. I love the pot that you put them in. Beautiful, beautiful sunflower. I almost did a sunflower, but sunflowers are kind of prima donnas. They like to take over pictures. So I like that your sunflower is by itself. Thank you, Lori. Oh, that's gorgeous. That's absolutely beautiful. I love the sinuous lines as they go down towards the flower pot. I love the foreshortened flower pot too. That's rocking it. Aw, look at that. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Isabel. Oh, Catherine. My gosh, Catherine. Is there anything you can't do? That is just gorgeous. Thank you, Mary. Oh, I love it. So you did it on your phone. Wow. Look at how even on the phone you can express the beauty in the lines. There's a real energy and there's a lovely action that's going on in the lines. I love the diagonal line at the top of the pot. Oh, wow. Carol Lee, that is just gorgeous. I love how you've darkened all of them in. It looks almost stormy, and I love how you filled up your space. Beautiful use of space. Wow, Gay. It's remarkable. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you. Oh, I love the flowers that are at the top. They're just kind of peeking out. They're like, don't forget about us. Mm. Thank you, Denise, for putting something so meaningful. It's just beautiful. Oh, thank you, Susan. I love it. I love that it looks like all the flowers are coming from far away and they're just bursting towards us. And I love that you did it on a little pad. Some of those little pads are some of the best things. Some of the best artwork I have, by the way, is put on, kids will do it for me on lined paper. So I love the idea of just using some random pad you have around. Just beautiful. Oh, Mary, did we see yours already? Oh, I love the colors that you used. They're warm and they're just vibrant. Oh, so marvelous. I love your signature at the bottom. I love it's just very, very, uh, it looks very, very easy. It looks very unrushed. Beautiful. There's something on lined paper. I love it. Oh, I love the curls. I love, thank you, Sam. I love the 3D shapes poking up and back. It's a very, very rainbow. Uh, oh, that almost looks like the markers you used were like watercolor markers. Bex, just beautiful. I love the bee coming over. We need more bees in our life. I love the flowers in the background. I love how you created space with the foreground, the midground, and the background. And again, beautiful use of colors. Judy, thank you so much for coming on. Fellow educator, kind, and look for beauty. Thanks for playing today with us. Oh, wow. That is super nice. I love the little cast shadow. I love the little branch poking up and back. It's very well composed. I would buy that. I would so buy that if in a store I saw it. Mary Kate, that's beautiful. Oh, I love, looks like you have a dandelion in there. You have a rose. Looks like maybe some phlox. Yep, I love the hand holding it, just gorgeous. Amy, thank you so much for participating. I like I love how you filled up the space. Some marvelous flowers. Thank you, Julie. Oh, I love the whimsy of your pot. I love how the purple one's just like, hey, I'm gonna go off on my own here. I love the unity of the colors. You know, it's just it's very well designed. Thank you, Reed, by the way, for arranging all this. Reed's the one who's doing all of the clicking and clicking through. Well, truly, you can see that People's Church is a dazzling bouquet of colors. All right. Well, I think we're heading on to the closing song now. According to what I see, it looks like the closing song should come after the picture sharing.
Hope you'll join us on this fun little ditty. It's called A Dazzling Bouquet.
Mine is a church where everybody's welcome. I know it's true, 'cause I got through the door. We are a dazzling bouquet of every kind of flower. Jump in the vase, 'cause we got space for more.
Come here, all you 6-foot gladiolus. Come all you purple lilac shining bright. Come let us all bloom together in one garden. A carnival, a fragrant scent of light. Well, mine is a church where everybody's welcome. I know it's true, 'cause I got through the door. We are a dazzling bouquet of every kind of flower. Jump in the vase, 'cause we got space for more. We don't simply tolerate each other. We ask and tell, we don't turn away. We give attention to every bud and blossom. Let every face grace the grand bouquet. Well, mine is a church where everybody's welcome. I know it's true, 'cause I got through the door. We are a dazzling bouquet of every kind of flower. Jump in the vase, 'cause we got space for more. Well, our demons keep trying to divide us. They document their lives to make them true. But today we're freed from our judging and excluding. Just look around, enjoy this lovely view. Well, mine is a church where everybody's welcome. I know it's true, 'cause I got through the door. We are a dazzling bouquet of every kind of flower. Jump in the vase, 'cause we got space for more. Well, mine is a church where everybody's welcome. I know it's true, 'cause I got through the door. We are a dazzling bouquet of every kind of flower. Jump in the vase, 'cause we got space for more. Jump in the vase, 'cause we got space for more.
All right. I'm hearing shouts of "I love it" from the peanut gallery upstairs, so I know that that song was rocking. All right. So before I go into the closing words, I'd like to remind you that if you would like to stay on after the postlude, you'll be put into a room and you'll have a chance to have what we like to call the coffee quarter, where you have a quarter of an hour to share the beginning of the summer and maybe all the wonderful things or challenges with a smaller group of people. If here you have found freedom, take it with you into the world. If here you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. Go in peace.